big sky, big potential. In association with Mills and Reeve, this is Eastern Promise. Achieving more together. Well, hello there, and welcome to Eastern Promise, the podcast that broadcasts the best of the East of England. No matter the subject or sector, there's excellence to share in here and out there. I'm Mike Rigby, and on this week's Eastern Promise podcast, we're at the University of Suffolk in Ipswich to chat with Dr. Laura Reeves about her research into hybrid working and specifically the impact of working from home on middle managers. Laura and I will be discussing her findings, and that's not all. Mary Jo Hill will be telling us about her hybrid working app, YakBit. So log on, check your speakers, and join me in the chat with Dr. Laura Reeves of the University of Suffolk on this week's Eastern Promise. First, on this week's packed edition, I headed to Ipswich, to the waterfront campus of the University of Suffolk, to meet with Dr. Laura Reeves. Along with Professor Claire Rigg, now at Lancaster University, Laura conducted a study into working from home, specifically the hybrid model, or agile working, if you've a mind to be technical, where you go into your workplace a few times a week. Laura and Claire investigated how agile working affected the sense of belonging experienced by mid-level managers. How does the distance and lack of personal interaction impact upon their relationships, both with superiors and subordinates? And what of the many personality types we all know from our own office experiences? I asked Laura to explain the study, its findings, and its conclusions.
I'm Dr. Laura Reeves. I'm a research associate in the Leadership and Management Academy, and I research the future of work, and more recently it's been hybrid work, more technically agile working arrangements, which means hybrid working.
Well, I'd like to think, and there's some evidence of this, that certainly from the point of view of my listenership, there's a lot of people who fall into the managerial and senior brackets who'll be very interested in this, who'll be managing people, responsible for people in those various positions. But can you just start us off by talking about how the research began?
So myself and my colleague, Professor Claire Rigg, she was at Suffolk at the time, but she's now at the Lancaster University Management School. We were very interested in the idea of who's supporting the manager, mainly because if you look at academic literature, there's a lot on employees and how particularly they belong at work, but there is very little in terms of the manager, who is sandwiched between employees at the bottom and potentially more senior roles at the top. And we were very interested in how they were adapting and experiencing these new ways of work, so hybrid work, when you're not necessarily seeing people every day, but you're equally expected to manage and hit your key performance indicators or the objectives of the organisation. So we thought the manager was a key role in making sure that things get done, but they're not necessarily focused on that much in the academic literature. So that's where it started. And hybrid work is a topical conversation at the moment. So a year ago I applied to the British Academy of Management for some external funding to look specifically at the relationship between managers, hybrid work, and how they experience a sense of belonging and how they belong. Belonging tends to be linked to that idea of, oh, I'm isolated, I'm lonely, so you don't tend to feel it when you're working on your own. But from the findings that I've got that I won't dive into just yet is
that
it is actually possible that managers can belong at home. So it's not a black and white, no, you have to be in the office to belong. And that is, to me, something that was interesting from the findings, because in theory that shouldn't necessarily be happening if we're working from home. It should be that there are issues with belonging. But yeah, so that was a very positive that came out of the study. And it was nice to speak to managers, and they weren't all saying doom and gloom, it's terrible, that there were some positives coming from the hybrid working world.
Let's just cover off COVID, I suppose, because that's the thing I think everyone will expect to be a huge factor in the shift in hybrid working, although plenty of people, I think, will have been doing at least one day or so from home. I know I was before COVID.
A lot of the managers that I spoke to actually were practicing some form of hybrid work before COVID, but COVID almost has polarised the idea that you don't have to be in an office. So COVID wasn't necessarily a driver for the hybrid work for the people. And I'm not saying that as a generalisation. I know that there was a lot of change with COVID, but these organisations, like you said, were practicing some form of flexibility and hybrid working before the pandemic. Perhaps that may put a different spin on the data, in the sense that they had that longer period of time to adapt. Mm-hmm. But I think with COVID, it just polarised some of the challenges. And I also think it raises the question, well, do we need to go back to the office? If we were able to adapt very quickly on a large scale through COVID, do we need to be in the office? Is there an expectation that we need to work in an office because we've always done so? And I think that probably is the leading question for me is, well, what does it leave? Where is the future of work if we don't need to be in an office? And there's lots of implications with that question, because do we need offices in all of this real estate we've got in the country, just in the UK alone? Do we need all this office space when we are working from home? And invariably it's working. I appreciate not everyone can work from home with the jobs that they're doing, but I don't necessarily think because one can't and the other can that we should rule one out than the other.
Yes,
there needs to be a way forward for flexibility in how we work.
How did you, or how should we, define belonging?
So we looked at it in terms of feeling that the academic phrase is being at ease with oneself, so that comfort around who you are, where you are and who you want to be. And that aspect in terms of organisations links to aligning to the organisation, developing relationships, feeling that you identify with your job role. So there's lots of facets to belonging. So defining it is difficult, but it's that inner, I want to be here. I want to be in that space and time, and I belong. And it's interesting, managers did struggle to define it. They went to, well, I really align with my organisation and I really want to be part of the organisational's values and norms. I have to align with them to feel I belong there. But I equally want to develop relationships and build on that relational connection side of things. But I also really like saying I'm a manager. Take pride in that. I'm a manager and I belong to that role. So there's lots of different aspects of it, and I guess you look at it at the macro, micro and meso levels. It will depend on who you talk to. Some participants told me that they didn't need to belong at work. They're there to do a job, and their belonging came from being at home and having that really nice work-life balance, and that a job was a function rather than something they needed to belong with or to, which was an interesting perspective on belonging.
I mean, that sounds healthy, very healthy on the face of it. But then I suppose if you were at senior level, you might ask, well, what is your investment in the role, and are we, are you exercising your best judgment in this role, or are you just saying, 5 o'clock, I'm clocking out? reflect on that if you will, but and then perhaps we'll move on to talk more about your findings.
So one of the key findings on that tension between who did the managers belong to, the majority of the managers felt that their belonging was contingent on their team belonging as well, which is fascinating to me on an academic level, because generally speaking, when we look at belonging, we're always looking from the I belong here. It's very individual, and we're looking at us belonging to something else rather than others belonging for me to belong. So in terms of managers in this pilot study, they felt that they belonged more to their team, that they were building a sense of belonging with. And particularly in a hybrid setting, they lost their connection and their sense of belonging with other managers.
I see.
Because they're not talking to them as much. There was that silo effect around, this is my team, we're working day in, day out together, and I belong with them. There was a silo effect with other managers, so they'd lost that. They weren't picking up on those softer skills where you're probably learning from each other as managers. That had disappeared. Problematic in the sense that you're probably duplicating, potentially replicating. There's no potential standardisation across different issues that are happening. No
shared lessons, no shared learning.
No, and that was a prominent challenge for managers, that some people didn't know other teams. If you think of a big organisation, you're working in your siloed bubble with your team. Outside of that, there was no communication, or very little communication. So they weren't bouncing the coffee conversations or the water cooler conversations you would have when you're making a coffee, aren't happening now. So managers are feeling more disconnected with their own, it's not horizontal and vertical, I know anymore with hierarchies, but there are peer-to-peer connections have reduced almost. But their team belonging was very important to their own sense of belonging, that their team around them felt a sense of belonging in the team. If that wasn't there, it was a challenge for them to belong, which was fascinating to me because it reframes how we understand belonging academically, which, as an academic, you get a little bit excited over these chestnuts in data.
So it's far harder, isn't it, with remote work, to rather than say stroll over to such and such a person's chair, hey, how are you getting on, is there anything you need, how's progress with XYZ, great, well done, brilliant, keep it up, and then stroll back to your office. That's a fairly quick job, whereas with hybrid working, it's when have you got 5 minutes for a Teams chat, we schedule a Teams chat, we need to move the Teams chat.
Which adds a formality to it,
exactly,
doesn't it?
Yeah.
You're scheduling in a meeting to have a 5-minute conversation.
Yeah. Is it all right? Yeah, good.
Yeah, and they were less inclined to do that because they were also very conscious of people's times and that meeting overload that can tend to happen because you're fully accessible all of the time. And that was a particular issue in the public sector, that the managers said that, it's great being from home, but there was that kind of accessibility fatigue where they felt that a meeting would just pop into the diary. There was no boundary around time or lunch breaks, or because you're fully accessible all of the time. And that particularly came out of individuals that I spoke to in the public sector, where you need that, we've got 5 minutes, pop it in and we can get it done now. There wasn't that thought about, well, actually, when is there a lunch break in that already really full day? I never assumed with a manager that they would feel more connected to a team because of the dynamic between, well, you're line managing these people, that professional boundary seems to have changed slightly. It's still there, but it has changed more so now with hybrid working than it was before. There with that professionality, they're building relationships in different ways, which is interesting in terms of belonging, but also quite challenging if they're not getting that connection with managers, because you're not sharing knowledge. What happens when people leave is when that
institutional
you don't have
memory goes, doesn't
that
it?
Shared knowledge. That shared knowledge, and I know that is becoming an increasing question in terms of age generations, and when older workers leave the workforce, how will we transfer in the knowledge through the generations? And I wonder if hybrid working will make that a little bit more challenging, that we're not sharing the knowledge as much as we were. We're almost, some people are learning as they're going, and that was another thing the manager said. I've learned how to manage hybrid on my own, particularly through COVID, when we were like
suddenly
everyone at home. Before that, I think people that were hybrid working, you tended to kind of have an idea of how to do it. But how do you do it is the one question, I think. How do you manage from afar? And then when you're just chucked into the deep end, you just kind of swim or sink, really. And that's how managers saw it, particularly those ones that were promoted through COVID to a manager role. They learnt by doing, which was another challenge, that there was no professional development for managers, or there's very little. There's an assumption that everyone can be a manager.
Yeah. No. No, they can't.
So yeah, it was an interesting one around that, who do they belong with and to, and what impacted their belonging.
So is there a unifying thread through sort of successful engagement for a manager and sense of belonging? Or is it very much, it works, but only if each manager is flexible enough to find their own way and their team accommodate the way that their manager is going to manage them?
So the way that I've analysed the data, I've said, well, the majority of managers have said they hybrid work, and it is possible to build a sense of belonging for themselves and their team, but they're very much aware that it could also go the other way, because you aren't in the office together, you're not picking up on those softer issues that you would have done in the office. So that was the kind of overall, well, actually, hybrid work is working to some extent. You can feel this sense of belonging, but there's that caveat. It's always a but, isn't there? There is a risk it will break down. So the next part of the analysis was, well, how are they building it? What are they doing? The main thing that managers said is it has to be that flexibility. There has to be a hybrid setting. So they're actually emphasising you need both. The ability to work at home and the ability to be in the office as well. There needs to be hybrid. So that was the first factor that they mentioned. They also mentioned that they had to be very proactive managers. And I don't really know how this fits in the traditional idea of managerial theory, where they almost call themselves the proactive intentional managers.
Yes, I remember those two words.
The phrase, yeah. So they had to be proactive in understanding who their employees are and their individual needs. So they assumed that one size didn't fit all anymore. And they had to be proactive in building a sense of belonging. And that ranged from having Teams chats where they were continually engaging with people but not speaking about work. So they had that informal setting where they could build connections with each other, to actually organising coffee breaks during the day, so that in-person interactivity. And there was the emphasis that one didn't replace the other, but you needed a balance between in-person events and not allowing isolation to creep in just because you're all at home and busy. So the proactive intentional manager, I don't know whether that is an adaptation to management theory that we understand, but it was important that managers were intentional about building belonging for themselves and their team. And the other thing that they said that was setting boundaries to maintain their work-life balance. Like you mentioned earlier, it's really easy to say, no, I'll just do that one last email as you're eating dinner, or coming back to work after you've put the children to bed because you've got a couple of hours, and why not, get a couple of hours work done and not go out for that walk that you were very much intending to do at the beginning of the day, but you lost the 2 hours in that meeting elsewhere. So the managers felt that there had to be open communication with their own work time, so there isn't that ever-evolving accessibility to them whenever that everyone wanted them. And they also felt that they should be really transparent with their time, perhaps having out of office on when, getting into the habit of having an out of office on every day when they've left the office, wherever that office is. Not necessarily just to communicate that, but also that guilt of saying, well, I'm leaving a bit half an hour earlier today, but no one knew I started a half an hour earlier this morning, and that guilt around, am I doing my job? And the perceived perception of, am I doing my job? So that was really important, that open communication and setting the boundaries, making sure we are setting boundaries and that we're honest about that. And the final bit around that work-life balance is not assuming that everybody works the same hours as you. Because in a flexible world, I start anywhere between 7:30 and 8 in the morning, but I don't assume that anyone else is doing that, because my lifestyle is I'm in the gym in the morning, so I naturally come to work earlier. And just, again, there was little cues around having just your work hours at the end of your email so that it's there for people to see. So there was that very much, they're very mindful of the work-life balance. Again, it can go either way. You could have a healthy one, or you can get sucked into that one last email at the end of the day, turns into writing a report, that turns into not sleeping.
Sending the report. Don't, been there, yeah. My peak hours tend to be when everyone's in bed and I'm not going to get any emails, or if I do, I'm very surprised. Talk some more about the research, and perhaps we can dig into the recommendations as well.
Yeah, so that was the main thing, that it's important that there is a need to belong, and that actually we can belong in hybrid settings if it's flexible enough to do so. And managers did say that in order to feel the sense of belonging, they need to be proactive and intentional, they need to be building connections with others, and they need to set these work-life balance boundaries around their time and their employees' times. But equally, when there's benefits, there's also challenges, and there were two main challenges that I think you'll probably be quite interested in.
Go for it.
The first one is this lack of peer-to-peer connectedness. This issue that even though they're feeling it on a team level, is completely broken down across management because they're just not seeing or speaking to each other in informal ways. Invariably, when they see a manager, they're in one of these meetings with 30 people on a screen and you've got your mic off and it's a all organisational meeting. I think one of the only times they probably see each other is at away days. You know, these one day a year where you all come together in person.
Yes.
That's the contact they're having with other managers, so they're not sharing the knowledge. That was a resounding issue, or a challenge, shall I say. The other one was difficulty onboarding new employees into hybrid settings.
Well, yes, indeed.
And this was another unexpected finding. It's one of those gems that you didn't expect to find, and it also gives you potential for future research, because if there's difficulty onboarding new employees, that's a real issue in terms of potential turnover of staff, productivity. And there was two issues. There was learning the softer skills that you pick up on in the office that you don't necessarily get from formal training. And there was also building their sense of belonging in the team. That was really important to managers, and it wasn't happening. And they don't have an answer for this challenge at all. There is still this ongoing challenge around onboarding new employees. So they were the two challenges. There were lots of anecdotal talk around new employees, and one of the things was around how you embed them into a culture when you can't necessarily define what a culture is, and you can just experience it in a space rather than saying, well, this is what our culture is at this organisation and this is what you need to do to embed yourself. One person that I spoke to specifically said they were really excited that they were able to potentially access more resource in the labour market, because you can, in theory, recruit from anywhere in the country because they don't necessarily need to be local to the organisation, because there is that hybrid element. But as soon as they advertised the job as hybrid and they asked the new recruit to come into the office for the induction, they got a resistance from the employee saying, well, it's hybrid, why do I need to come in?
Well, surely though, the word hybrid implies that at some point you will need to. And
it wasn't happening. There was that disconnect between, well, I'm working from home, I live miles from the office, and that was not the expectation of. And this may be a communication issue when you're recruiting and all of that as well. So I do to acknowledge that there may be more going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But there was a resistance from employees to say, why do I need to be in when I can do my job from home? That question, which is perfectly reasonable when we managed to do it so quickly through COVID. And I think that was the impact of COVID, that we've proved we can do it quite quickly. And all of a sudden we need to be back into the office for morale, and I think was Amazon's, we need more innovation to happen, and that was one of the reasons Amazon wanted to come get everyone back into to the office. Was it Amazon? I think it was Amazon.
It could well have been. It sounds Amazon-y.
Yeah, they wanted people back into the office quickly, and resistance from employees.
I mean, when we talk about people who don't want to go in at all, I would classify that as remote working.
Yeah.
Which, if I don't know, I'm not saying I've looked on LinkedIn jobs, but those are the three, in-person, remote and hybrid. Those are the three quite clear classifications, so it puzzles me slightly. But you're talking about the market will respond to more people wanting that hybrid work by offering hybrid as standard. If we want the best, we need to meet them where they are. You can't just blanket say, no, these are the terms, take it or leave it. Because the people who want that, and I dare say that includes the best and the brightest, will just say, no thanks, and they'll end up having to offer it. And I just ponder to myself, and I've heard people say this, it's nonsense, we need everyone back in the office. You just want to say to them, put a hand on the shoulder and say, are you lonely? Seriously, I'm not mocking. Are you lonely? Because if, for example, if you want that work-life balance, but if you're a senior manager who's with adult children, and you've got a partner who's similarly off doing all sorts of professional and social things all over the place, there's a very good chance that you may be lonely and you may want everyone back in the office so you can interact with human beings again, which is fine. If that's what you need, there are many, many ways to realise that, but it's really interesting to me. Just reading your research, that's the kind of thing that occurred to me, just to think, hang on a minute, maybe there's something else here with all those people who are insisting on return to work, and there's a deeper psychological reason.
Well, we all have this is where psychology comes into sense of belonging. It is considered a fundamental human need, and that connects to the idea of being lonely and isolated. And in theory, I would argue that if we are away from each other for periods of time, and I would put my hands up and say this happens to me particularly through the summer months on campus, when traditional academic teaching falls away because the term has finished, I always say to myself, I'm going to make an effort to go in at least twice a week to get some sort of human interaction and see my colleagues, because I can go from June all the way to September at home and I don't realise it at the time, but you go a bit stir crazy.
Yeah.
You're in your home, well, I'm in my home, I live there, I work there, and don't get me wrong, I have my workspace and I have this space and it's all divided, but it's still your home. And it is individual. I get a little bit cabin fever after a couple of weeks, and every single year I say I'm not going to do that next year, and every single year I don't do it because it's convenient to be at home. When you've got a parcel come in that needs signing for, which tends to now be, we're reverting back to everything needs a signature when getting things at home all of a sudden, even one-time codes from Amazon to prove that it's been delivered, and all the complexities of, well, just leave it on the porch. That's not happening anymore. Or workmen in the house, or children, doctor's appointments, all of those things, it's convenient to be at home. But it makes me go crazy. It makes me go, gosh, I haven't seen anyone. I haven't, and it does go back to that loneliness. Don't get me wrong, I do really love the flexibility of being able to choose, and I'm really privileged to have that. As long as there's nothing on campus, I can be at home, I can be anywhere working, which is lovely. But I do think there is something around it, why. I wonder if somebody has, said, nope, everybody's back in the office, demand it 3 days. I wonder if somebody has actually genuinely turned around and said, well, why is that the case? Going back to this demand for being in the office, I remember one distinct participant that I spoke to, and they turned around and they said, I don't have a justification to get people back into the office. I can't see why we need to be in the office.
And they can't answer that question, can they? Why?
They can't answer the question why. And that sticks in my head. I think two to three of the managers said, I don't have. There are challenges. They acknowledge there's challenges around onboarding and the lack of connection they have with other managers, but they weren't necessarily afraid to try and mitigate them or put things into place to help with those issues. But they turned around to me and they said, I just can't think of a reason why, or even be able to stand up in front of someone and say, I demand you back into the office. They just didn't have a reason for that. And I thought that was an interesting take, that, because there is so much talk at the moment about mandating back to office work, which has huge implications for people, particularly if you don't live locally to the organisation.
Yeah, that's...
And I've only ever been in the context of hybrid work. I finished my PhD around 3 years ago, so I've only worked in a hybrid setting. I didn't have to do the 9 to 5, 5 days a week before that. And the days that I am, incidentally, in 5 days a week, I go home and I say, I just don't know how people did it, because it's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's a completely different way of life and work. And I absolutely do, I am strongly for the flexibility, to be able to be flexible. And what that looks like in each organisation is very different. But having that kind of flexibility in our approach to things helps with all of the challenges. And they were able to give me 4 key recommendations. One of them was to invest in training and development, specifically for managers. And I should say that third challenge was that there was no training for hybrid managers. They were just learning by doing, particularly from the COVID era. They've learned, they get things wrong, they learn again, they put things in place. So investing in training and development for managing hybrid teams was a key recommendation, that they wanted some sort of training, and that also led to then in-person and online events, so you have the ability to network with other managers and learn from each other. The second was to have a peer-to-peer mentorship within organisations, not necessarily within the same team for managers, but across the organisation, so that you're deliberately talking to different managers in different departments, if you're big enough, and really trying to break down those challenges around peer-to-peer disconnect, because there's lots of knowledge managers feel that they're losing out on, or potentially there's lots of ways that things can be done that they may not be doing that could help different challenges or issues that they're facing at work. The third is to encourage managers to create proactive strategies for interaction. So they don't necessarily want organisations to have a policy or another kind of guideline around, you have to be a proactive manager, but they need the space to be able to do that. So it comes back to the flexibility that, you're the manager and you manage your team in the way that you want. They need that kind of flexibility to be able to cultivate belonging and interactions with each other. But there also needs to be a mechanism to feed that back into the organisation, so you can, that continual shared knowledge and learning. And the final one was explicitly acknowledging work-life balance. The organisations need to genuinely respect work-life balance, and they use that word genuine, so it has to be a genuine acknowledgement for it. Not
grudging,
Not just, oh yes, we respect that. It needs to have some sort of sincerity behind it, that it is going to happen.
So you've got to walk the walk, not just say, so of course we will.
Yeah, no, it's not a matter of saying, no, 9 to 5, that's it. That's all we expect, because when there's a deadline, that doesn't quite work.
No.
The only issue that managers, as I said, didn't have a recommendation for is this issue around onboarding new employees, onboarding and inducting, depending on how you interpret the words. And they didn't have a clear solution for that at the moment. There's still challenges to how do we immerse someone new into a team when you're not in the office every day? How are they going to learn the softer skills? How are they going to understand what the culture of the organisation is when we're all working at home predominantly? So yeah, they are the key recommendations that have preliminarily come out of the study. And the final thing, I think, is around what is the future of work? How do we define that, and how should we be defining that? But that is a huge question.
It is.
For a research project I hope to do soon.
I was going to say, that was going to be my next question to you. What next for this really fascinating area of study?
So there's a few things that I'm really looking at. Is something to do around management training. So is there some kind of management development courses that can be defined or designed, particularly co-produced with managers, so it won't be another, here's a course that works for everyone, but actually build a study around producing something that is worthwhile. I'm fascinated around what work is, and the reason I say that is I'm really interested in looking at how different age generations define and see work and what they prioritise. And this has come from anecdotal conversations when I've been interviewing on this project and another completely separate project. There's a common thing that several participants across 2 different studies, this one and a project around postmenopause at work, around the younger, and I put the younger in, I know no one can see me, but...
Yes, for listeners at home, Dr. Reeves is using air quotes.
Yeah, just because, young, what's young, old, and in between, I don't want to define that, but younger workers don't have the same work ethic as we. That's that kind of like young versus old, and that's anecdotally coming through different projects at the moment when I'm looking at different topics. And I'm really interested to see how age generations, particularly now work is changing and how we understand work, what are the priorities of different age generations?
I find that fascinating because I was in a coffee queue at an event, and I won't say where and I won't say who, because there was somebody behind me in the queue doing exactly what you're saying, your kids, no work ethic and blah-de-da. And I just sort of thought, I bet if you go back to like Hadrian's Wall in 3 AD, you'll find a couple of centurions watching their legionaries going, legionaries today, useless. No work ethic, can't hold a shield properly, can't do the turtle, it's nonsense. This is my theory. It's how people like me, the older members of the workforce, cope with getting old. We don't like the fact that these are the young people, whippersnappers, coming up and looking to displace us, so we have to disparage them in some way. Yes, but they may be younger and fitter and stronger, but we're just better because we've got the work ethic. Yes, work ethic, that's it.
But I'm really interested to see what are the priorities when we look at work and what is work, because work has changed so much. The physicality of work and how we do work, it's changing so quickly. And technology is only going to change it more, I think. I think it will change significantly. Yeah. And I'm really fascinated in coming up with solutions around embedding new employees into hybrid teams, because I am in the hybrid team camp. I don't think it's going away.
My thanks to Laura and, in absentia, to Claire Rigg of Lancaster University. Also on my thank you list are Jason Noble and Graham Darby, both of the University of Suffolk. So, if you're a manager working from home, you're going to need first-class digital and internet-capable tools to help you make sure your team are doing okay. And world, you're welcome, because yet again, the East of England has the answers you need. The amazing app YakBit, created to ensure no one gets left behind whilst working remotely, has been developed by MJ Hill, whom I contacted remotely from a coffee shop that's named after a certain Herman Melville character near Kings Lynn Enterprise Park.
Well, my name is MJ, or Mary Jo, and I was born in Norfolk and educated here, and then went and lived in London for quite a while, lived and worked in London, and then returned, as many people do. Mm-hmm. So YakBit, what is YakBit about? It's really for managers of remote teams. We know how rural it is, don't we? It's a destination county. And we have now so many people remote working. It's here to stay, isn't it? And I think the Employment Rights Bill from last April, its drive on flexible working means that we have to be even better managers. We have to be better managers of remote teams. And I think middle managers, they're the ultimate sandwich, aren't they? Their role is harder than ever. When we talk to managers and we say, the average time spent in online meetings per week equates to 13 hours or 2 days a week, most managers, their eyebrows shoot up and say, is that all? Because I'm in meetings for, twice as long as that and feel like I'm never off. And I think that's really hard for managers in particular. So that's why, YakBit we think is really important. It's very simple. It's very easy to use. It's for managers of remote teams to have better, more productive meetings. So it joins your meeting. At the moment, we work on Teams and Zoom, and it only turns up when you choose it to. That's really important, because I think some of our other sort of transcription tools, not that we are just a transcription tool, start turning up to every single meeting, and then before you know it, you're getting really annoyed with the fact that you've got someone else in your meeting and you don't want them there. Anyway, so it comes to your meeting, you choose when it does, and afterwards we give the leader of that meeting, and it may not be the manager, we also have much flatter hierarchies, don't we? And it may be that someone quite junior needs to run a new project, or, a particular team. And we've found that by adopting YakBit, it has enabled them to come back to some basic principles. What are the expectations? What are the behaviours that we're going to have in this online meeting space? So that it's not a reactive one, because post-COVID, we entered into remote, didn't we, as a reactive state. And I think we've now got to reclaim some structure. So YakBit comes to your meeting. Afterwards, it gives you a report, sends you a report on interactivity, on the participation, gives you some language markers on language use that's helping or detracting. And with that, we also give a short, sharp coaching session, which ultimately can be automated. It's really good for two reasons. It's kind of in-context training for managers. And then for the company itself, it's really useful data. It can help reduce management operating costs. Does everyone need to be in that meeting? What other forms of communication are we using? Could we use better? Because in my own experience, I did a lot in London with large complex organizations, and kind of, the anonymous employee surveys, and what are the points of friction in a company. And we know that it's always going to be two things: communication and clarity of role. Yeah. And communication is constant, isn't it? It's always changing. Language is always changing. So these are the things that we've done. And I think what was really interesting, what Dr. Reeves said, managers need to work harder than ever. They have to be more intentional in building relationships. And we know how much harder that is online rather than, in person at the coffee machine or whatever. Most people are managers because they're process experts. Not necessarily the expert in managing people in all of their many issues, either work or personal, because of course that's all blended as well, hasn't it?
Yes, of course.
So it's really, it's really hard. 80% of managers, have so much time. And I think even Laura said, it was that CMI, wasn't it, that 82% of leaders consider themselves accidental. They've had no training. Our data shows that less than half have had any training in, how to run an online meeting. And yet, here we are. One of the greatest frustrations of managers in the last 10 years presented to me as an executive coach is, why won't the team speak up more? Now, YakBit gives the opportunity for some expectations to be recentered.
I think that's powerful. I think it's, it's not just the manager saying, you need to speak up. Actually, the data shows that we need more from you. And it's how you use and and I imagine you would do this, and I'm sure you do. It's saying to the manager, you need to use this in a way that says, we actually need to hear more from this person.
Totally. I mean, we had a manager who used this and was like, great, I'm sharing this with the team straight away. This is, we're going to have a discussion around what do we expect, what's the input, what's expected from you, how do we do that? And it was in support of actually onboarding a new member of staff, which is quite an interesting user case, and that was what Dr. Reeves was talking about. It's really hard to explain to someone who's largely remote what your culture's like, isn't it?
Yeah.
But this gives you an opportunity to go back to, well, this is our meeting culture, and the reason we're going to revisit it is because we've just used YakBit, and this is great because it gives us a little bit of a tune-up. This is what we want. This is where we want to go. And the expectation is that yes, you will contribute, or you will prepare for the meeting, and you will have an expectation of contributing for 10% of the time.
My thanks to MJ for the YakBit Yakety Yak. And if you're based here in the east of England and you're launching an exciting new event, product, service, research findings, app, or even food. In fact, I'd quite like more food and drink launches, please. Then do get in touch with me, Mike Rigby, at this email address, podcast@easternpromise.org.uk. Or you can go to our website at easternpromise.org.uk. Click on contact and fill out the form. Couldn't be easier. Operators are standing by. Isn't that right?
100%.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely.
Absolutely. And that's it for episode 139 of the Eastern Promise podcast. I am Mike Rigby, and will be so again next week, when my guests will be Felix von Nethusius and Shelley Belgrove, founder and clinical director, respectively, of Wello, the Cambridge dental startup that's getting its teeth into the high street. Get your pearly whites scrubbed and remember to floss, because that one's up in just 7 days' time. Now, rinse and spit. Until then, bye for now. To hear other episodes of the Eastern Promise podcast and to find out more about what we do, go to our website at easternpromise.org.uk. Eastern Promise is a Pudding Shed production in proud association with Mills & Reeve. Achieving more together.